Well, welcome to this afternoon's deeper dive, a part of our Waterside Chat series. Today's guest is Jo Knight, the network's communications consultant and video producer. She will be taking us, she will be talking with us about using video as a part of your outreach and communications efforts. Jo will cover the why and how of good video and share a few of her tips and tricks for making videos look more professional. Well, welcome, Jo. Let's get started.
Thank you, Tom. I'm very happy to be here. And thanks to everyone who is joining online. As Tom said, I'm just going to give an introduction to video shooting. And before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit more about me, but just to let you know, there we go. I just want to go through some of our goals for this session so you know what we will be doing. So first and foremost, we want to understand why it's important to use video as a communications tool. We'll cover that. I will give you some tips for recording video interviews in this session. This is going to be part one of part two, and we'll cover B-roll or video footage in the second part. We want to create a little bit of an excitement for shooting video because I know some folks are hesitant out there. And most of all, we just want to make this easy. So everything in our video session today will be aimed at someone who does not have a lot of video gear or experience. And so what we're talking to you about today is something that you can get started on immediately. So just a little bit about myself. I essentially started in television production. I worked for a local news station in Raleigh, North Carolina at the very beginning of my career, and also spent some time working at CNN in Atlanta. After a number of years there, I actually became very passionate about environmental conservation. I always have been, but decided to make a career shift. So then I went into nonprofit communications and worked for a number of different environmental conservation organizations. But during that time, I definitely kept a toe in the video production world. And about 10 years ago, I realized I really wanted to get more involved. And part of that was because it had become easier and easier to produce videos on your own. I do have a extensive gear and equipment, but considering where I started back in the late 90s, it is a lot more accessible to create your own videos. And with today's iPhones, it's even more so. So I've been doing this for about 10 years. And what we're going to cover today are some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years. And just some few guidelines to help you think about video production. So hopefully you will be excited to start yourself. So why video? Like why, if you don't already shoot video or create videos, why should you do it? And one of the main reasons why is because the communications landscape has changed significantly over the years. This is something we all know, right? Social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, videos become king or queen, I guess I should say, on social media. And it's a good, essentially, if you want to communicate with folks and you're not using video, you're missing some great opportunities. Just to promote another deeper dive that we did, Colin Delaney did a deeper dive into social media. And if you really want to know how to use video in the different social media platforms, he does touch on that in his deeper dive. So strongly recommend going and watching that. Video also puts your viewers in the moment. Because there's a combination of both visual and audio information that you are absorbing, it is a way that viewers can really just be in the moment when you are recording. Excuse me a minute, because mouth is running dry. Also because you are connecting with people, you're getting to see their expressions, you're getting to hear their voice. It's a way that you can connect with people emotionally. Being able to see people on screen and see their emotions conveyed directly is something that is a real benefit for video. You can also put a human face on concepts, social injustices, policy issues. This is something that's particularly important for us here at the Marine Fish Conservation Network, where fisheries management as a policy issue can be kind of dry, right? But if you are showing fishermen, both recreational, commercial fishermen, that is a human face that is put on a policy issue. And hearing directly from fishermen is an opportunity to really bring the issues that we have home. And lastly, because of all this, it has what I call storytelling stickiness. You tend to remember things, or at least I do, that you see in video that you might not necessarily remember in other ways. An example, if you think about some of the major historical events, and you think about like 9/11 or the bridge collapse in Baltimore or Tiananmen Square or the Challenger explosion, like things, big moments. You may not necessarily remember all that you read about those issues, but you definitely remember the video that you saw. And it's a visual way to just take in information that really puts you in the moment and really makes a lasting impression. So if you're not using video, you're missing that stickiness of your message in your communication strategy. So there's a lot of different ways to use video. Again, we are focusing in on things that you will be using. So I tend to think of what are sort of the two buckets of video. And the first is social media. These are the short, quick hit videos that you see. They're entertaining, they're catchy, they're quick sound bites, things that people can absorb quickly. And if you are primarily recording video for social media, you might think about recording that video in a slightly different way, and we'll go into that. The next bucket that we're talking about is sort of the longer format audiences. And I'm not talking about the documentaries or the things you might go to a movie theater. I'm talking about things that are videos that are, over 2 minutes long. It's really an opportunity that you can dive a little further into educating about a subject or incentivizing an audience. Social media, when you think about it, it's kind of a wide net. You are appealing to a wide audience. With the longer videos, it's really about honing in on a specific audience. And one of the things I think that always is unique, or I really want to emphasize in the longer format videos, is a call to action. And that could be go here to look at a URL for more information. It could be contact your member of Congress. It could be learn more here, contribute to a campaign, donate money. There could be a number of different calls to action, but I think when you're thinking about video, having that call to action on a longer format is something you absolutely want to include. So what do we want to use video for? There's a number of different things that we can use video, different types of video you might want to consider when thinking about recording video. First of all, simple branding or organizational awareness videos. They're very effective in telling people who your organization is and what you do and what your mission might be. Fundraising is another great opportunity to use video. It's an opportunity to hear directly from your experts. You might also get some testimonials from people who support your organization, and you can make a direct appeal to the folks you are looking to raise money from. They can be educational. So if you have a complex issue, video is an opportunity to distill it down into a very simple explanation and use a combination of pictures and words to explain whatever issue it is that you're trying to convey. As I mentioned before, testimonials are a great thing to capture. Folks who are supportive of your organization, who are very passionate about your issue, Having that third party validation can be really compelling for audiences. And tutorials is something that I think a lot of organizations don't use that often, but I have seen some organizations really use online learning series as a way to either train people to do things or kind of similar to what we're doing here today, just to give some teaching tools to people who might need them. The main thing with this, and because video is a communications tool, it's important to know your audience always. With all communication strategy, knowing your audience and who you are communicating to is just as important with video as it is with any other communications tool. So with each of these longer videos in particular, really know who it is you are talking to. And the one last thing I want to cover is why have a video presence online? We have talked a little bit about why videos could be important to your organization, but they actually are important to you as a professional. The opportunity to showcase your expertise and on-camera skills is actually a really key thing for many reasons. First of all, if you are interested in participating in panels or conferences, it's an opportunity to share your expertise and your smarts with someone ahead of time who might be looking for speakers. Similarly, for television interviews, that's one of my clients. We produce stories for a syndicated national show. Anytime we have a story, I'm looking for experts. And one of the things I do is Google the issue that I'm interested in learning about. And if there are videos that come up that shows someone who is very articulate and has really good on-camera skills, that gives them a leg up in terms of reaching out to them to ask them for an interview. Similar, and again, B-roll is something we'll cover in part 2, but the B-roll footage that you have of your issue signals to television that you have footage to give them potentially. And if you are a news crew and you want to cover a story, but you don't have the footage that you need to cover that story, knowing that somebody else does and you may be able to use that video footage also gives you a leg up in terms of whether or not that reporter will reach out to see if they can cover your expert or even just use your video footage and get some on-screen credit. And lastly, as I mentioned before, you need to meet your audience where they already are, and that is online. So it is something that is key, I think, moving forward. I don't see a time where video will become less important. So the more that you are comfortable with having a video presence online, I think the more successful your communication will be. So yeah, that's a little bit of the why we should be shooting video.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Before you move on, can you jump back for a second on B-roll? I've always wondered why it's called B-roll.
Yes. Happy to do so. So this is actually a really old term. In the days of analog editing, they literally would have an A roll of sound bites that they would put on a reel. They would have a B roll for video footage that they would use to cover those sound bites. And they would edit both of those onto a C roll, and that would be the final product. So for some reason, the A roll and C roll did not stick around in terms of jargon, but B roll did. So B roll, when someone says B roll, it's a term that's used still to this day. It is essentially just all the video footage that you record that's not someone speaking on camera. And it is essential for any sort of video production. So it is in high demand, and if you have it, then it is, as I mentioned, it gives you a leg up in terms of people reaching out to you to see if they can use that footage.
Awesome. I had no idea why it was called that. And,
Yeah.
you know, I would have guessed it means background, but now I know.
Yeah, no,
Right.
that is That is way, way, way back in the days, even before I was editing. And I did start off in analog editing.
Indeed.
So it is a very old term.
Well,
Great. So in order to produce videos, we've talked about why it's important and why you should have an online presence. The sticking point is you actually have to shoot some video footage in order to have an online presence. So that is where we're going to be spending the majority of the rest of the time, is talking about how to shoot some video of yourself or someone else speaking on camera so that you can start to create this online video presence. And the issue that we run into time and time again is people think, I'm not a professional videographer. People are comfortable recording their family, recording fun parties, this, that, and the other. But when it comes to talking on camera, people become shy about it. So one of the main goals for this session today is to hit home the idea that you can do this. And one of the reasons why is because the changing landscape of video. It used to be, when I started, that you would never consider airing anything that wasn't absolutely professional. Those days have changed. People on television are very used to seeing amateur footage. We're watching things on social media. Everywhere that we are watching video, you're getting content that's not professional, and it's perfectly fine. What's greater, or what's more valuable, is authenticity. And that is where it is vital that you are shooting video from your own perspective. And that is one of the things, like for our fishing community, people who go out fishing every day might not necessarily think what they're doing is all that exciting. For those of us on land, it is fascinating, and having some authentic video footage from a fishing adventure or a day fishing the water is absolutely something that folks are interested in because of the authenticity. The other barrier that used to exist that just absolutely does not anymore is having a good camera, because you have one. It's in your pocket. I have an iPhone, but any smartphone, the cameras are exceptional these days. So there's really no excuse not to pull out your phone, because you are carrying around an excellent camera always. All right, so we're going to take a moment and talk about getting started. And again, I want to talk about the bare bones, just getting you out the door to start shooting some video footage. So first step literally is to pull that camera out of your pocket. That's a no-brainer. The second step most people ignore: wipe off your lens. There's a little tiny lens on your camera, and it gets smudged from fingerprints and all sorts of things. So just take 1 minute and wipe off your lens, and your video footage will significantly improve. The other thing that is not as intuitive to us, because we hold our phones like this, is that unless you are shooting specifically for social media, which would be TikTok, Instagram, which shows videos in a vertical orientation, you want to shoot everything horizontally. So that way you can have video footage that is for YouTube, for your website. It's easier to edit. It also, if you do want to convert it for the vertical orientation later, it is easy to do and edit. There are many camera angles. That is sort of 2.0 of video shooting, but for now, I would recommend strongly keeping a camera at eye level. I know people say that shooting above you is supposed to make your chin look smaller, but it is not as engaging when you're trying to talk to someone. You want to have the camera at eye level. And remember that the camera is off to the side, so look directly into the camera lens when you are shooting yourself. Most cameras have a touch screen for focus and exposure. They're very easy to use, so there's nothing there you need to fiddle with. And pretty much everything else you can keep on auto for beginners. So there's not a lot of steps you need to take in order to get started. So hopefully it's really easy for you to do. The one thing I wanted to mention, because it is on my iPhone and I'm assuming in other phones, that there is an option for shooting format that could be confusing. So essentially, this is the one I want you to memorize. It's high definition 1080p. The P actually you would think stands for pixels. It does not. That's a whole other story. But what does this mean? And this is what it means. So back in the day, we used to watch television at standard definition, which is that yellow box in the corner. Over time, we, as you know, technology advanced, we basically put in more and more pixels into a picture, which created a higher resolution. And so now 4K is actually out of date. There's 8K. There is, they keep doubling the amount of pixels. For video on the web, all of the 4K and above, that's pretty much overkill. But that full high definition 1920 by 1080 pixels is a beautiful sweet spot. That's the one that you want. You may also have an option for frames per second. Adjusting the frames is how you get slow motion and such. But there are people who have different philosophies about 24K, which is more cinematic. For our purposes, 30 frames per second is your happy spot. And the last, I actually don't think you will need this, but just in case you do, the shutter speed is something that if you need to adjust it, the rule to keep in mind is whatever your frames per second are, double that, put it in the denominator, and that should be your shutter speed. That's the only thing you need to remember. Just whatever your frames are, just double that and put that in your shutter speed. All right, so that is just bare bones getting started. Now I want to chat a minute about speaking on camera and giving you some pointers there. So there's two types of, and I'm going to call them interviews, that we want to chat about that you'll most likely use in your video shooting. The first is the direct to camera, and that is what we're most used to looking at on social media. There's a vertical orientation for your TikTok and Instagram. There's also a horizontal orientation for websites. YouTube is another example. Essentially, here you want to look directly into the camera. The idea is you're talking directly to the viewer. So anything on social media, this is pretty much the given. You want to center the person in frame, either yourself or the person you are shooting. Again, this is a great thing to keep in mind for social media. And you always, as best as you can, choose a location that gives a sense of place that makes sense to your story. The one on the left is Linda Bankin, who is the executive director of the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association. She has a great example of this. I actually want to play this is just a clip from her full video, but let's give it a watch and then we'll talk about it in a minute.
I'm Linda Benkin. I'm a fisherman here in Sitka, Alaska. We're heading out fishing right now. So what it looks like today is we're heading out. We're going black cod fishing. We might get a little halibut or rockfish too, but targeting black cod. It's a tough year this year for longline fishermen, black cod fishermen, halibut fishermen here in Alaska, as it is for most fishermen around the nation. With restaurants closed, our prices have really dropped. 60% for black cod, probably 30% on halibut. So that's what we're looking at, making less this year than we made last year. And none of the costs of fishing have gone down any. And really very little of the federal money has helped fishermen through this time.
Great. So I'll ask you, Tom, what sort of stood out about that? I'll tell you like why I loved that video.
Well, what stood out is that you felt like you were standing there with Linda. She showed you what she was seeing. She wasn't just talking at you. And what I noticed was it wasn't like she was looking at a script. She kept cutting her eyes down to looking at what the speed of the boat was. So she was actually, it didn't look like she was acting. It looked like she was actually just being recorded while she was actually doing her fishing. So to me, it felt particularly authentic and something that I would point to and say, gee, you want to talk to a fisherman? It did. This looks like a fisherman fishing.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. There's a real sense of place. She is taking you on a fishing boat. It's in the moment. She's very authentic. She is paying attention to around the boat, but she's also looking into the camera, talking to someone as if they're standing there with her. Yeah, no, the authenticity about this piece I just love. So I think it's a great example of how to bring people into the moment in a way that differentiates it from an op-ed or something like that. All right, so that is talking directly to camera. As we mentioned before, video is a good opportunity to showcase experts in your organization or even yourself as an expert. And one of the ways that we can do this is with what I'm going to call a more formal interview. It is essentially it's the way that interviews are shot for most of your news programs, your 60 Minutes, any of the more formal news style interviews. And the framing is such that it's usually, mid body with a little bit of headroom above the head. The expert's looking slightly off camera, talking to somebody slightly off camera. There is a little speaking room in front of the person, so that there's the space that you want is in front of the person's face. And as I mentioned, if you're doing longer videos or highlighting your experts, it's a really nice way to showcase their expertise. So you've got two styles of framing and composition. Now I want to chat a little bit about lighting. Now, there is a lot to lighting. I'm not going to go into 3-point lighting, which is how you do interviews and such. We're assuming that you're using the lighting that is around you, mostly outdoors, in a room. The main thing I want you to take away from our little conversation on lighting here is make sure the light behind the subject or behind you is less than the light in front of you. And at the example on the left, even though it's sunset, there's barely any light at all. Just the fact that there is a little bit of light behind the person means you can't see the subject at all. So essentially what you want to do is the example on the right, where the light is directly in front or a little off to the side. And that way you're not casting shadows. So just if you're outside, look where the sun is. And if you can have the light so that the sun is not behind the person, you will be leaps and bounds above a lot of videos that are out there today. So a few more just quick tips about lighting composition. Mornings and evenings are a great time to shoot. In the middle of the day, the sun is directly overhead. It casts a lot of shadows. In the morning and the evening, the sunlight is beautiful and golden. You'll look great. So if at all possible, step outside in the early or later part of the day. Cloudy days, it's counterintuitive. They actually make for pretty good shooting days. And that is because the light is more uniform. You're not getting those strong shadows. The downside is sometimes it could be so cloudy that it's a little muddy. And that is just something you need to work around. But if you see a cloudy day, don't necessarily say this is not a great day to shoot. And lastly, if you're outside and the sun is strong, you can find some shade. It can be a great place to do some recording. The main things is obviously not so shady that it's dark. And the most important thing, as I mentioned before, is to make sure there's not too much light behind the subject so that the subject's in the shade and background is in bright light, because then it'll create that backlighting effect. A couple other things just to keep in mind. Be aware of shadows. If you're recording somebody or looking at yourself, just do a quick glance and see, are there any shadows from my hat, from the glasses, from a pole up above that's creating something that goes through your face? It's just taking a moment to look at how the light is playing on you and make sure it is not doing anything super distracting. Glare. I actually have my glasses here. Glare on glasses, with ring lights and such, they create some distracting things. I don't know if you can see me over here, but anytime you can adjust, either have somebody take off their glasses or adjust so that the light is not reflecting back in the glasses, makes for less distractions. Similar, a lot of people love their sunglasses. Understand why. Sometimes you need them in order to be comfortable, but if there's an option to take them off, please do, because being able to see someone's eyes really allows to create more of that connection. As I put here, they're the window to the soul. So being able to see someone's eyes just further helps that emotional connection through video. As I mentioned before, pay attention to the background. Is it too busy? Is it too distracting? Are there objects that are out of place? Like, do you have a branch that looks like it's growing out the back of your head? Just take a quick moment, similar to looking at your own face, to check the shadows. Look behind and see if there is anything that is too distracting and would take focus away from your subject. And the two things I'm going to tell you now, I feel maybe the most important visually, because they are the hardest to fix in edit. And the first one is focus. There is absolutely nothing you can do if you shoot a whole video and someone is out of focus. So if you take nothing else away from this, tips and tricks for making more professional video, make sure the person you are recording is in focus. The next one is to keep it steady. We've all seen videos where, the camera is moving like this and you're getting a little seasick from watching it. So there are a number of different things that you can buy online. There are little tiny tripods that you can hook onto things. There are selfie sticks. You can even go with a gimbal. That is a machine that basically allows you to move like this and your camera stays steady. There are a lot of options. However, the one I always tell people about is one that I came up for a video shoot we did for a single mom with a bunch of kids, and she needed a second camera and had nothing in her house. And so we came up with what I call the pantry method. As you know, the camera is off to the side, so the rubber bands are not in the way. And I've actually used this a number of times. So even if you don't have any of the fancy equipment, you still have options from every day to use. And the beauty of this is, if you need to tilt it a little bit, you can always throw in some ketchup package. So it's surprisingly versatile, and one that I have used more times than I care to count. Audio. Now, this is actually, again, in terms of things to pay attention, the audio can often be more important than video. So the point here is, keep your microphone as close to your subject as you possibly can. And remember that the microphone you're using is actually in your phone. So if your subject is way far away and you've got a beautifully composed shot, it's not going to do you any good if you cannot hear that person because their voice is too far away from the microphone. So this is where I actually suggest that if you are going to buy any sort of equipment and your audio is consistently lacking, this is a good place to invest some money. Finding a good microphone or an audio recorder is something you might want to consider. The other option I will just throw out there is that you can use a second iPhone. They have an audio recorder on the phone that you can use, and it is something that's a little more complicated than your basic edit, but that is something that you can actually merge the good audio with the good video in edit. So just something to consider, but as much as you can, think about your audio. All right, let's look at a video. What I'm about to show you is a bunch of testimonials. Hopefully you'll see some of the things we've been talking about in practice. And I also want you to listen to the sound bites, because that is going to be what we talk about next, the content of what you're talking about. This is a video that I worked with the Ocean Project for World Ocean Day. Short, but let's just give it a listen, and we can chat about it afterwards.
I love the nature, I love the mountains, I love the sea, I love all the nature our creator has given us.
I really love crabs.
I think it's essential that we protect our coral reefs and maintain the biological diversity for all future generations that is so unique to our landscape here.
It's actually fun to just chill and relax, and I feel like it should be more places like that due to the fact, at least for teenagers. I know for teenagers, it's really therapeutic for us.
We're not the only living beings on this planet, and it's up to us to have stewardship of the oceans, keep them clean, not just for our grandchildren to swim in them, but because they're part of the whole ecology.
Great. So yeah, I was gonna say, Tom, feel free to jump in if you have some thoughts. But there's a couple of things that I want to make sure to point out about these sound bites. But yeah, was there anything that sort of stood out to you as things that we have talked about so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the subjects were indicative of the topic, right? So they were representative, they were authentic representatives of what the message that was being trying to get across. And you know, it didn't feel like, gee, this had been heavily produced actors, you know, portraying advocates or citizens. It felt very authentic to me when I saw it. And there was nothing particularly distracting about, you know, well, I wasn't paying attention to what they were saying because I was watching the turtle eat a seagull or something like that. So, you know, I thought it was a good representation of the things that you'd been talking about, Joe.
Great. Yes, absolutely. The reason why I wanted to show this video is because you saw, there were some differences in the way they were shot. They were shot at different aquariums, different zoos, different science centers. The authenticity of the message is absolutely the biggest thing I want for folks to take away. There were some things, like for instance, the first soundbite, there were some challenges with audio. And that was a case where, you had an opportunity to see where having some cleaner audio would even make her soundbite step out a little more. But even with all of that noise around, the authenticity is the piece that really comes through.
Can I jump in on that for a sec?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of course that was very noticeable, but it also, the point you made there is it made it authentic. It didn't sound like it had been cleaned up in post-production, and it felt like, gee, this was a person who was actively engaged and willing to say what they felt, and it wasn't sort of scripted,
Exactly.
faux whatever, right? And I thought that was true in all of the subjects. They are all the interviewees. You could feel that connection that you had talked about, because you could see them, you could see where they were. And none of it was distracting because, sure, I mean, intellectually, I understand it was a little muddy sound at the beginning, but it didn't take away from the message or the messenger. And I think for people who might be hesitant to do this, they look at something, they record it and they go, oh, that didn't sound very good. And yeah, I don't, maybe I should do it over. It's like, no, don't make perfection the enemy of the good. Get it done and get it out, right?
Absolutely. No, you're nailing exactly what I want folks to take away from this, is that we can give you a lot of tips and tricks for making things better, but perfectionism isn't the goal. Like, authenticity is the goal. And hearing from those folks, even if there are some minor flaws or this, that, and the other, the most important thing is the message that gets conveyed. So yes, I mean, that is what we want. We don't want anybody to be scared of taking video, because there are going to be things that could be done better, but that's okay. Like, it is, again, just the authenticity. The other thing I wanted to point out, the teenager in the park, his entire face was covered because it was COVID. He had a mask on, but you saw his eyes, and I love that, how much emotion came through his eyes, and that you still felt that real connection because of that. So it is I think just a really good example of multiple, different setups for recording, and each came out a little differently, but all were very powerful in their own way.
I think that point about the eyes is a really good one, Joe. I mean, it is um, establishing that connection. And as you said, he had a mask on, and yet you knew that he was connected to what he was saying, and he was connecting to the audience. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, it was great working with all the the museums and such who were sending me footage to edit together. They gave me some really great things. Oop. So let's see. There we go. Content. So now that we've talked a little bit about framing and sort of the technical parts of shooting, just to give you some tips and tricks to think about, as Tom and I had started to talk about, is more the content. Like, what are you going to say? And here's just a few quick tips for thinking about what it is that you want to say as part of these interviews. So, speak in complete thoughts. Most of the times when you are recording something, you will ask somebody a question. Make sure the person, or yourself, if that's what you're doing, speaks in a complete thought so that it's easy to edit. Keep it concise and simple. One of the things I loved in our last example was the man who said, "I really love crabs." It is simple message and really great. Done. Avoid jargon or acronyms. This is just, again, if you're thinking about your audience, and specifically if your audience is not from the community and knows all the jargon, or even if they are, you want people to focus on what you are saying and the meaning behind it, and not trying to figure out what you are saying from the acronyms or the jargon. So as much as you can, speak in plain speak. Speak from the heart, and that is, you just heard a whole bunch of people who spoke from the heart, and that's what made those sound bites so powerful. Always know your audience. That is just for any sort of video that you are doing. It is important to speak directly to somebody and to have that person in mind. And as with all communications, think about your story and think about your message. What are the main things that you want people to take away from the video? And as we've shown time and time again, create that sense of place. If you are recording and talking about something and there's something around you that you can point to, do so. The example from Linda Benkin's a great example, just really showing that sense of place, even if you are talking directly to camera. So, what questions are good to ask? There's obviously a lot of thought that goes into what you want to say on camera, and that will determine what questions you ask to evoke the sort of responses that you want in your video. But there's two things just I think are good guidelines for thinking about first thinking about the content that you want to create. And the first bucket of questions that I would like for you to think about is essentially questions that get to the heart of your issue. Here's a number of examples. What's the problem? Why does it matter? How are you helping to solve the problem? What's the solution? What's the vision for the future? Really just walking people step by step of your issue, and asking simple questions that people can answer on camera so that they can edit together to make a good story.
Hey, Joe,
Yeah,
can you flip back to that slide for a sec?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
let me ask you, maybe philosophical isn't the right word, but in making a advocate video, right, or a messaging video, there's, I think, perhaps a inherent tension of over explaining and creating putting out too much information, and where you might spend, if, let's say you're going to use 60 seconds, you might use 20 seconds of background information that all of a sudden you're now a third of the way into your minute and the person's eyes have glazed over because they don't know what the problem is, or why does it matter, or what the vision for the future is. And so do you feel like, in at least advocacy type messaging, video messaging, that getting to the nut graph, if you will, to the heart of the issue, is probably one of the single most important ways to set the video up?
Absolutely. It comes back to message, and that's from the previous slide. You always want to go back and make sure that you're recording what the significant message is for this particular video. At most, you should have 3 messages that are sort of your takeaways. The beauty with video recording is that you can ask a bunch of questions and not use them. So oftentimes, people do feel the need to give a lot of background. And sometimes that is just important for people to kind of think through how they want to talk through something. I will say, just somebody who does a lot of video recording with interviews, there's a lot of stuff that I might not necessarily use in the heart of the video. But when it comes to getting those pithy sound bites, asking some of the right questions that basically get at the heart of what your main message would be is something that is absolutely fundamental to doing. So I'm thinking more of like a long format video recording. If for something for social media, you want one message and just get that one message and you're done. Like that is, I think, a different way of thinking about video recording. Just, in, out, move on. Again, if you are looking to have a longer video, you might need a little more content and you might have a little more time to set up that content. But if you only have a few moments to interview, absolutely just stick with your main messages. That's a really good point, Tom.
Yeah, well, I don't want to belabor it. It's just that to me, it's like, if I'm going to lay out the video, do I want to do do I want, waste is going to sound horrible, but that's not really what I mean. But I don't want to use up valuable time setting the stage and all that, where I could come back to it later. And so if I say, look, it's a burning building, I don't need to tell everybody that it's a burning building that used to be built, that was built in 1923 and blah, blah, blah. I can come back to that and say, you know what? the reason why we care is that, this building was so, it's, I guess I'm kind of asking you, professionally, in the formatting, background first or message or hot point first.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a good question. And that is, I think, a whole other sort of bigger topic, the art of the interview.
Yeah.
Um, that there is, a flow to an interview, and there are thoughts of, have the questions that you might not necessarily want to jump in first, go first just to get people warmed up. There's sort of an arc in terms of people who do interviews. So that is, I think it to your point, it depends on whether you're going to interview, or I'm sorry, if you're going to edit the interview questions later.
Sure.
In which case you can put them in whatever order you want.
Makes
If you're just shooting it as is, then absolutely start with the burning house.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, again, like in your interview, all these questions you may not want to ask, but here's just some questions that you might potentially want to ask to think about if it makes sense to frame your questions this way. And the other bucket of questions when I think about interviewing, I want the questions that get to the heart of the problem, but I also want questions that evoke emotion. And the questions examples here are the ones such as like, what do you love the most about X, Y, and Z? What would you miss? What are your hopes for the future? What do you want others to know, and why should they care? So really getting some emotional, asking some emotional questions will a lot of times give you some really great answers. And again, will allow for that connection that you have with folks who are watching the video. And, these are questions that you may ask someone else, or these might be questions you just ask yourself before you start recording. Just if you can think about, the two buckets, like what are the questions that get to the heart of my issue or my main message? And then also, what are the questions that evoke some emotion that we want people to share? And the most important question, obviously, this is for if you're interviewing somebody else, is there anything you'd like to add? I've gotten more great answers from this one question at the very end of your interview. Just say, is there anything you'd like to add? And it is surprising what people will come up with. So I always put that one in my back pocket, and I highly suggest if you're talking to someone, you do too. And the last part about this is just have fun. I mean, that is really honestly half of it. I mean, obviously you want to think about messaging and good visuals and good audio. But if you're not having fun, I think that sort of comes across too. So make sure if you're recording yourself or whoever is in front of the camera, just, have as much fun as possible, and that will resonate on screen. So that is just some very, very basic and quick overview of tips and tricks for recording people on camera. I was going to say, and Tom, I'll ask if you have any kind of questions or thoughts.
It's what was interesting in what you're talking about, and I hope people take this to heart, is that it's not hard. It's really not hard. And that as you were talking about interviewing, I'm thinking, okay, well, if I'm gonna do a call to action type messaging video, I'm interviewing myself, right? I'm interviewing myself. And so being able to say, gee, this is the crux of the issue, and, be able to tug at that heartstring is probably the two most important elements that I would probably, as I set it up, think, okay, these are the things I want to do. I think it's, I had a personal bias against video until I, you know, saw the evolution of video, and as you point out, it's become so much more simple. And my bias was that it just 3 minutes of video took 2 hours of editing, and it drove me crazy. And now you can do a lot better. And I think, at least in this session, Joe, you've helped us see how, I don't want to insult people by saying it's easy, but I mean, it's not as hard as we want to think it is, and that it makes a lot of sense. And of course, because you can make that authentic connection with people, it's so much more valuable. My colleagues in the Fourth Estate who are scribes are going to hate this, but because it's much more valuable than the written word. But the fact of the matter is, it is videos, and images catch people's eye. And if you can catch their eye, it's going to work better than, trying to force them to read 50 words or 100 words. There's a reason why the philosophical comment of a picture's worth 1,000 words still holds up, right? And in this day and age, if we're not doing the pictures, then we're really missing out on an opportunity to bend the narrative towards those things that we care about.
That's a perfect way to frame it. And that's, I think your point is good in the simplicity of it. I mean, it is, as many things, the concepts behind them are simple. The execution can be hard, but that's something that comes with practice. And the main thing that I think you and I both want people to know is just to feel free to get started. And even if it's not quote unquote perfect in your mind, like, that's okay, because the authenticity is what really does sell your message.
For sure. And I think we're a good example of that. We the network, Waterside Chat. I mean, it's evolved professionally, production quality, since the first 1 or 2 episodes, right? And it would continue. Yet, if we had waited until we were going to do it perfectly, we would never have done it. We would never have done it. And it's the importance of the work that we do, and being able to have effective command of the tools that help us get our message out is invaluable, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, so I hope people feel energized to go and record themselves, experiment a little, see how it goes. Obviously, I am here. Oh, a little plug for our next one. We will be shooting the B-roll, as we were talking about before, the video footage. We'll go over some tips and tricks and have a discussion there. But if you have any questions, feel free to email me. There's my email address. Any thoughts about what do I do in this situation with this video setup? Happy to answer questions, or just, in general, if there's anything you want more information about, feel free to reach out. So,
well, and for our listeners, it's bluegreenjoe, J-O, @gmail.com. And so thank you.
yes.
Well, I'm looking forward to part 2, and we'll get that set up and ready for next week. And until then, thank you very much, Joe.
My
and
pleasure.
Colin, you can take us out.